Okay, I guess I got to start. Sorry, this is Community Economic Development Committee, February 4th, 2021. Welcome, everyone. Mandy, please call the roll.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant? Who's going to be late or in another meeting? Mr. Dunbar is going to be a little bit late. Ms. Zalatel?
Here.
For non-committee members, Mr. Rivera? Mr. Perez-Verdia? Ms. Allard?
Here.
Ms. LaFrance? Chair, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you. So let's go. Mandy, can you go through and see who else is here and get them to quickly give their name?
Sure.
We had a Mr. Haberman request for that, and it's not unreasonable, I suppose.
So on the list in order, I'm Mandy Honest. I'm with the clerk's office. We have Ryan Yell with the planning department, and then Jane Sawyer with AMCO. And then from the public, I have Jenna Weltzen. And on the phone, I have a number ending in 9449 and a number ending in 3009. So if 9449 would like to introduce themselves.
You can call Haberman.
And then ending in 3009, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Cecilia Donaldson.
Okay, and that's all I have in currently.
All right, thank you. And we should be careful about identifying ourselves when we speak so that for the people listening in and then the recording, people know. So we'll work on that. Okay, so the first thing, I guess anything to be added to the agenda? Okay, hearing nothing else, so let's see, I will watch the chat here if you want to get in the queue. Okay, so the first thing is a quarterly update on marijuana facility compliance. Mandy, we didn't have anyone from Code Enforcement here.
We do not, but there's the handout available on the webpage and that was emailed out. And the comments that came back were that they did not have any issues.
Right, any comments from the committee on that? I think reading from a 2020 quarterly inspection, all conditions have been met from AR 2019-357 S1. So I think we're done with those required inspections. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, okay. and at the last committee meeting, or well, the last committee meeting that this was brought up, there was the discussion that since there hadn't been any issues for a very long time, and the way the wording of the AR was that potentially we didn't need to go into 2021, and Code Enforcement went ahead and just sent this. So I put it on the agenda for the committee's review, but yes, this should be the last one.
Okay, thanks. So the next item is the discussion on the proposed changes on THC content for edibles. And is there someone, Ms. Sawyer, I know you said you'd be available. Is that something you could introduce the topic and kind of its genesis?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm in my car in this call. Unfortunately, because on our side, on the state side, MCO side, this regulation is out for public comment. I can't be part of the conversation. There is a formal process for receiving and answering to questions, and that is the reason why I can be part of the conversation. So I'm here to listen to your conversation.
Okay. Sure. Is there? Yeah. Okay. Ms. Weltstein, we'd invited you to speak because you had some knowledge, perhaps on the, where this came from and the implications and so on.
Sure. Jana Weltstein here, through the chair. So this came from many industry members requesting it because most recreational states have a 10 milligram serving limit. So right now, Alaska is 5 milligrams, and you can have up to 10 servings in a package as long as they're demarcated for servings. This would increase that from 10 servings, which would be a 50 milligram limit per package, to 100 milligram limit per package, with 10 milligrams in each serving, as long as they were, demarcated, so it was clear to the consumer. Kim Cole is also on the line. She's an owner of Raspberry Roots, and so she deals with a lot of retail customers, and she also has a manufacturing that makes edibles. And a lot of the consensus about this hopeful change is that, this way people don't have to eat, a whole pack of gummies to get where they need to go, and to get the benefits that they are looking for. It also was requested by, a lot of medical patients that don't consume marijuana via smoking it, but they consume it via, eating it. Also, a lot of people have been switching to edibles because, COVID has kind of got a lot of people scared about smoking right now. And so a lot of people are just trying to keep their lungs as healthy as possible. And so they've been switching to edibles. So that's kind of like where this came from. Of course, there's, the other side of the argument, which that, 10 milligrams maybe is too high, and, it's working as it is. So why not keep it as it is? But from the industry side, we'd really like to see it get changed.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I got a question, Pete.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I was just going to say that I've been hearing from people for a couple of years that they thought that the potency was too low in our edibles, and that we should make an adjustment statewide to our regulations. And they pointed to the allowable limits that some of the other states that had legalized recreational marijuana had. And so I think this is probably needed, and I'm sure that the consumers will probably appreciate this change. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Crystal?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've reached out to the health department and to APD in regard to this. I was kind of interested at first in just asking some of our departments if they ever get any information about when any of the alcohol or marijuana codes are being revised, and they said they didn't. And I certainly understand where a lot of those revisions are just kind of technicalities and that, but this one to me seemed to be important enough that I wanted some of the experts, the people that really do end up dealing with this kind of on the other side of the fence, if you will, the non-retail side of the fence, which basically is our police department, and in some cases the health department. And anyway, I haven't heard back yet from the health department, but I did hear back from one of our traffic investigators, the one that typically investigates the ones that are drug and alcohol related. And anyway, I kind of caught him a bit off guard without enough time to chime in today, but I believe they will be. But, at this point, the concern is kind of the same one that we had when we were really even talking about edibles and having on-site consumption capability months ago, or probably a year or so ago, when we were having that discussion. But the concern is still what kind of impact it actually has to people in terms of driving under the influence. And certainly there are issues with edibles just in terms of how the reaction of a particular individual might be, and how long it sometimes takes for something to really take effect. And at that point, a lot of times by then people may say, oh, I'm just fine, and get in their car and drive. And then all of a sudden the potency kicks in. And of course, we're doubling the potency on these products if we do go to the higher content number. So anyway, I was hoping that this committee would, take a broader look at all of this, just in terms of its impacts also to public safety, and with the issues that we already have in regard to alcohol and substance misuse. So I will be able to have investigator done with us on our next meeting. So I was hoping that maybe we would just continue this conversation and then discuss whether or not we want to support or oppose this particular revision. The comments have to be in, I believe it's the 5th of March, by which they need to be into, the 5th of March, that they need to be into AMCO. So anyway, hopefully we can have a bigger, broader conversation on this, because I think there are some other things to consider rather than just demand by the industry. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right, and I do see Deputy Chief McCoy and Officer Dunn have joined the meeting. So let me go. Meg had a question, and then we'll go to them.
Thanks, Chair. And I see that we don't have Dean Gates here today, but I would like to have a discussion, and perhaps it's ongoing. It wouldn't necessarily to be for any comment we might supply to the state, but if the state chooses to increase, what are the options at the municipality? Could one option be to keep the current per serving size, but allow the per, and I'm sorry if I get this wrong, transaction or day size to equal what the state is allowing? So I guess I want an opportunity for us to look at all the various permutations that the municipality could take if the state does in fact pass this.
That's a good point. Thanks. So let's see. I don't know that we have anyone from the health department here, but Deputy Chief McCoy and Officer Dunn are here. Are you guys ready to kind of share some insights in this?
Mr. Chair, this is Mandy. I actually don't see them. I put them on the invite, and that might have been why they popped up, but I don't see that they actually joined the meeting.
Oh, I see. Added to the meeting. Oh, okay. Well, that's too bad. Okay, I was unclear on if they were ready. And then the health department, Crystal, did you had contact with Heather? Were they planning to come today, or?
I did contact her earlier, and she said she wanted to be kept in the loop, and but I did not hear anything specific to having anyone join us for this meeting. So again, I can certainly follow up on that, and definitely I think within the next 2 weeks when we have our next meeting, I think we could probably have somebody lined up there as well for that meeting. So.
Okay. Yeah, we should definitely do that then. And what do we call on? I'm sorry, it's Kim from Raspberry Roots is here.
Yes, I am.
So I'm sorry, I forgot your last name.
Cole, that's fine. That's fine.
Kim Cole, that's right. Okay. We like that for the record. So okay, so kind of speaking a little bit and just in prep, I think we'll have this discussion more at the next meeting when we get people from the APD and health department here. But from your perspective, and kind of what Meg Zaltel had said, what are the issues? So you have a certain per unit size now at 5 milligrams, package size at 50. I mean, what are the packaging challenges there? If Anchorage had different rules, could we stick at 5 milligrams per serving, but you could go to 100 per package? Is that difficult to do?
Yeah, it would be kind of a nightmare, to be totally honest, just because we ship our edibles from here to Fairbanks, down to Juneau, to the Valley, all over the place. And so if we had to it's just not a good business model to have to cater to so many different areas, and a lot of mistakes could potentially be made, not just because of, oh, is this one supposed to be in this package or this package, and this can only be sent to this area and this can only be sent to this area. It would be kind of a nightmare to have to differentiate like that.
Okay. All right, thanks. Any more on this topic?
Just in general, increasing our edible dosage from 5 to 10 milligrams would benefit the industry because most people cannot feel the effects of 5 milligram dosage. The first time or two, I may have been able to feel it, but after that, your body just kind of adjusts to it really quickly because it's so small. And because of this, edibles are currently such a small component of what is actually sold in the shops, because people don't want to eat the equivalent of a meal in order to consume a dosage that actually helps them. So this doesn't mean that all the manufacturers are going to increase their dosage and packaging sizes across the board, but it gives an avenue to cater to those consumers that need that higher dosing, especially medical consumers. And where we currently stand, we've kind of priced the heavy edible users out of the market because of these limitations. So it's unfair to those individuals. And that's the issue that we're really trying to solve. And edibles are still one of the largest aspects of the black market because the legal market just can't compete with the dosage or price point due to that dosing and the cost of testing for such small increments. So increasing the dose, would bring some of these, bring in more of these consumers into the legal realm. And it would bring us on par with all the other states that do have that 10 milligram dosage. So we're not asking for something that's more than what's normal, but all the other states do have that 10 milligram dosage.
Okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you. So any more from committee members? Okay, Ms. Allard, you're not on the committee, but you're welcome. You have a thought? Okay, well, having finished that, the next thing was to continue our discussion on the proposed changes to Title 1080 on marijuana. And we have 45-page document we were going through, and we got through about page 13 or 14 at our last meeting, but Dean Gates isn't here today. He's on vacation. So committee, what do you want to do?
John, this is Meg, if I may. Sorry, I could type
Sure.
in and just hit the button. I would like to know if we could start a discussion on a few of those items that we really needed to kind of start to hone in on some policy ideas about, whether that was, if I remember the document, we'd set some larger items aside. And maybe we could take up one of those and just start that discussion to put some ideas out there. I don't know that it will necessarily require Dean's expertise in the moment.
Yeah, that's fine. Any other thoughts, Crystal? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think Meg's got a good idea. We do have a couple big ticket items that we have just kind of glossed over a bit, and we probably need to get down into the nitty gritty of it. And my only concern is that we don't have Mr. Constant or Mr. Dunbar with us. But obviously these are things that maybe we could go ahead and at least target those specifically, and then we'll be able to make sure that we make those priorities at the next meeting. So I think we could at least broach that subject of targeting and figuring out, identifying those specific ones that we know we need the bigger, deeper dive on. Thanks.
Okay, so which ones are those?
Who was the keeper of our notes?
I have some notes.
Yeah, I was gonna pull mine up too, but one of them though I believe was in regard to exempting certain facilities or certain establishments when the facility they were in it might have had some protected uses nearby, but the entry to those facilities actually had them far enough away that they shouldn't be a concern. Or anyway, I don't remember the exact detail on it, but I remember that it had to do with the boundaries for the protected usage, other protected usage uses in that area.
I think so, Crystal. We had a case where, because we have this, the kind of the first division is, are you 200 feet from the lot line as the, straight line? And we had a case where the strip mall was quite large, and there was a protected use kind of at the far end of the strip mall, out of sight, that was within that 200 feet, but kind of effectively it was not impacted by this marijuana store. Couldn't see it, traffic wouldn't go by, and so on. Is that what you were thinking in that case?
It might be. It wasn't one of the items that I was really interested in. I think it might have come from Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Constant, but I just vaguely remember some of the conversation about trying to do something that allows for those more unique situations.
Yeah, and at this point, we just made it a variance, I think. Mr. Yell, you're on. Is that what we did on that one?
Yes, so this is Ryan Yell from the Planning Department, and in that particular case, it was a variance, and the variance was approved, and it was a good case for the variance. One thing to sort of keep in mind for the purposes of this discussion is just because a variance is triggered doesn't mean that the code is somehow broken or flawed. That's the purpose of a variance, is when you have those unique situations where the regulations are overburdensome, and the variance provides relief from that. So, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and it seems to me that actually worked fairly well. It was a clear case, and we understood the difference. But would you want to move on from that point, just to see if Chris and Forrest might have some deeper thoughts on that? And I think, one thing that we had dangling out there was, we talked, I'm not sure if we were done with what were the triggers to make us review. We had looked at some of that, and Dean had some, so that was one thing. And then NOVs and the fees for those. And I don't see anyone from code enforcement here. So they had said that at some point they would come up with some comments on it.
John, we have Mr. Dunbar with us too.
Oh, okay. All right.
One of the other ones was to kind of consolidate the list of protected land use types. We had kind of a pretty exhaustive list, and some of those kind of fit into smaller categories. So we were looking at maybe trimming that down a bit so that it wasn't redundant, and so we could tag that as one of those that we could spend some more time on whittling down and coming up with a real just making a decision on. So that could be one.
Yeah, and I think we had a list that 2 meetings ago that was given to us.
Yes, we had. Right, it was a comparison of protected land uses and separation distance requirements.
There we go, with the state.
That Brian Yell put together for us.
And how far did we get with that?
I don't remember that we had any kind of decision made on any of that. I think we did look at the list.
Okay, yeah, I don't have a lot of scribbles on it, which means it probably wasn't covered much. So, Mandy, was handed out at our December 3rd meeting. Is this posted online somewhere so people can look at it?
It is. It's still available on the CEDC webpage. And for those that are on Teams, I posted a link in the chat to go directly to that handout, but it's still listed on the webpage as well.
Well, we could go ahead down this. So Forrest is here. I think you had some thoughts on this. Do do you remember getting this, or do you have access to it as we go through it?
John, I'm sorry, I just arrived a little late, so I'm not totally sure where you're at.
Okay, we got through the very briefly on the THC thing. We will carry that on at the next meeting, and now we're on kind of changes to the code, continuing that conversation. And Dean's not here, so weren't going to go through the draft AO that he prepared. So we're going to look at some of these bigger issues, and there's a link in the chat to this list that is a comparison of our protected land uses in the states, because we talked about consolidating it a little bit. And I know that was something you'd been concerned about, and I guess many of us. So anyway, so that's there. I just want to make sure you had that in front of you. Meg, you have a question?
Well, I just want to talk about this maybe from, a little bit of a broader perspective instead of getting into just the one for one on the list. If you look at, and I've got it up here, the separation from protected land uses, and you see kind of the narrative. So the AMC versus the Alaska Administrative Code. I think it's similar intent, but one is simply more restrictive. So if you take that idea, that big, broad, general idea, and I wasn't here for the original Title 21, so I will just caveat all of this, and you can throw it out if it just doesn't make sense in the context of what we've done. But it seems that if you look at the way the state has done it, it has this 500 feet. It labels out the particular under subsection A protected land uses, and it feels like ours is much more complicated. And I understand it was complicated, and I don't quite 100% get the intent behind that. And again, I wasn't here for the original discussion, but it feels extremely restrictive considering state has put in place. And I guess I was wanting to get at kind of the why of that, and if that why is still applicable today as it was when it was originally drafted before getting into this very specific uses.
I could address that because I was there. And Forrest was there. We did initially, I guess our starting point was, of course, where the state is. That's the requirement. And then we said, okay, where do we go from there? And the broader picture was, it's brand new, it passed to make it legal in Anchorage, but not by an overwhelming margin. There's still a lot of people really anxious about opening marijuana shops. It's just a revolution idea. So we didn't want people who are opposed having it right in their face and angry at the people opening the shops. And how do we prevent this? And so kind of thought of as a bubble of influence, around these shops. How do you prevent these triggers? So, of course, you start with that 500 feet. And then, we added some different protected uses, but somewhat based on requests from people. And then the 200 foot, which we made the initial trigger, was designed because you could we had huge discussions on what a walking route is. And, can you cross a street? Does it need a crosswalk? And we deemed, no, it doesn't. You're allowed to cross at any intersection. It's an implied crosswalk. So that was a very big deal. Because that 500 feet, what is that? And then, but you could, with that requirement, where it's the shortest practical walking distance, you could have a marijuana shop right across from some use that could be very upset by that. It could be across the street from it. So we got into this 200 feet to prevent that. So, and I would say now, that may not be so necessary. I think we have a lot of marijuana shops around. They've proven themselves to be pretty good operators, and they've generally fixed up old beat up buildings and made them nicer. Security's improved, and I just have not heard pushback on it, significant pushback, for a couple of years. And I think like the last one, we had a comment, and it was generally about a little bit of litter, So So I think it is worth looking at some of these to see, do we really need them anymore? On the other hand, maybe we don't have complaints because they're working extremely well. Forrest, thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, John. Mr. Chair. So actually, I don't think, John, I don't think you and I voted on the original system with the, I could be mistaken, with the protected land uses. I think that actually passed right before we got on the body that listed out the different protected uses. I think where you and I came in was the discussion that you just had about the, you know, the sort of 200 feet sphere of influence, I think you called it, and then the real detailed discussion about the walking routes. I don't think we talked about, because yeah, reading through this list, there are a couple on here that to me don't make a lot of sense, and I feel like I would have probably pounded the table a little bit when it happened. I agree that there might be cases where we want to streamline this a little bit. In general, though, I think I'm particularly interested. I know some people want to make it even more restrictive, and so that's the first thing the first kind of fence post I want to put up is I'm not interested in making it more restrictive, because I know there are some pushes to, you know, to add even more things or to cap the number that can be in a neighborhood or things like that. And I just don't think that makes a lot of sense. I would like to hear from. Well, I'd like to hear from the community if we could, but also Ms. Weltzine about the 200 feet and whether it has been causing a lot of problems or if it's working well, because it seems like in most cases the system is working fairly well, but I don't know if that is a misperception on my part.
Yeah, let me, Ryan wants in, so let me call him Ryan and then we can work our way around. Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was just going to recall the discussion crosswalk gate of 2016, where we had the facility on Minnesota, which triggered an enormous discussion and some regulation changes for separation distance requirements. And just to sort of add additional information on that 200-foot requirement. So, and this is for Ms. Salatel, any intersection in the municipality, there's a crosswalk at every intersection within the municipality, and because of that, shortest practical pedestrian route could be measured through that intersection. But while I was out measuring the shortest practical pedestrian route across Minnesota, you know, the thought came across my mind, like, this is insane. Who's going to actually cross Minnesota in this way without going through a signalized intersection? So the rules were changed so that to measure shortest practical pedestrian route on a street that was a classification of a major arterial or greater, you had to cross at a signalized intersection. So thus, even though the subject facility was across the street from a park, which we thought at the time had a playground on it, which hence the nickname Crosswalk Gate, turned out not to be a park. But that way, the actual shortest practical pedestrian route went from roughly 200 feet up to like 900 feet, because you had to walk down to the nearest signalized intersection to get there. So that's where that 200 feet comes into play, and that's sort of some background on exactly how shortest practical pedestrian route is measured in those cases. So thank you.
We also had that case on Potter that would have had a shop right across from the kids gymnastics facility that was far away using a crosswalk, but it was right across the street as well. So there are a few triggers there. Ms. Weltzine, you're an attorney for lots of these shops and potential shops. Can you speak on this?
Sure. I mean, I actually, and a lot of people will disagree with me, but I actually like the 200-foot straight line, because you know, you get in a situation like in other towns, you'll see a marijuana shop actually share a property line with a sensitive use because the pedestrian route is more than 500 feet. But I mean, logistically speaking, it's sharing a property line with, say, a children's home or something like that. And other communities haven't adopted this 200-foot, you know, buffer or bubble of protection. So I kind of like it. I mean, I don't agree with all of the sensitive uses that are identified. And I think it gets kind of, you know, a little bit in the weeds as to like, you know, what's a church, what's not, and having to deal with all those kinds of things. But when it comes down to like schools and daycares and whatnot, I think the 200-foot straight line has actually been a good thing. And I think, you know, I've actually mentioned it to the state board and said, you know, you guys should really look at how Anchorage does it, because that does help protect things where, you know, legally under the state law, it might be legal, but it's, you know, again, sharing a property line with a sensitive use is not a good look for the industry, and it's not a good look for the community. And but some of the communities haven't invoked this rule. And so I've asked the state on a couple of occasions to look at this concept because I think it is a good one. And again, lots of people will disagree with me on that. So just FYI, that's not like the industry's feeling. That's just my feeling.
Well, I appreciate that. So you do potential marijuana shop owners come to you and maybe with a location or some thoughts, and have they not been able to get a location that they wanted because of the 200-foot?
Well, I mean, sometimes, yeah, sometimes they can't. More often, you know, we're seeing more and more of this mixed use development, and like the property downtown that's developing a mixed use, it kind of stinks because that's a great retail potential, but we can't utilize any of it because you can't have, you know, residential in the same lot as a marijuana establishment. I think things like that are more restrictive in a less common sense way than the 200-foot buffer zone. You know, the 200-foot buffer zone is what it is. You know, if it's 200 feet and, you know, you can't go for it, or you have the variance option and you can make the argument as long as it complies with the state law. And I think we saw that in Clear Cut Cannabis, where yeah, the big property that church sat on was 200 foot in distance, as you know, as the crow flies. It was way longer, close to 1,000 feet walking distance, and the assembly got to make, you know, the common sense choice, and we brought the variance, and the assembly decided, yeah, that makes sense to give a variance in this case. I think that system works, and I think where people haven't been able to get locations where it doesn't make sense has been that residential issue.
Okay, thank you. Meg, you have a question?
Yeah, if I may, to Ms. Weltzine. So I appreciate your perspective on this. Do you think do you have any feedback on the list of protected uses that you've either encountered resistance from, or any issues with? Because we only get the notice of them, you know, further along in the process. And I can see instances where perhaps an applicant or a prospective applicant chooses to not move forward because and maybe even seek a variance because of a particular use type is a bit more problematic than others. I get the whole sharing a lot with a school idea or a daycare, but I was just wondering if you had any perspective on that generally.
So, I mean, you know, Eagle River has a lot of protected uses that are, you know, make it very, 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 very difficult by design to get into that market. So I think, you know, residential could be reduced to not include that. And then, you know, when Mr. Whittleton just talked about a gymnastic facility, in my understanding, a gymnastic facility doesn't necessarily count as a youth center or a child care center, just because it serves, you know, that function. So I think maybe there's a little bit of confusion as to, you know, what exactly is a youth center, what exactly isn't. And I wanted to pull up the lists of protected uses. I don't remember them all offhand, but I think, you know, the definitely the ones in Eagle River, and I understand by design have made it, you know, impossible to get a non-variance required store out there.
Thank you. You know, and the reason I ask, Mr. Chair, is really, you know, when I look at the list and the difference between the state and the municipality, is there are 17 items listed on the municipal side, and it is just much shorter on the state side. And again, I really am thinking about is the reason why that existed at the time of its implementation still the current reason we either need to keep them or that we should maybe be making alterations?
Yeah, and I guess that's our discussion now. And certainly if we put something forward and, you know, advertise it well, we'll hear from the public and kind of get some guidance on that. Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify the gymnastics or like a yoga studio or a dance studio. Those would fall under instructional services as a use category. So those are not part of the protected land uses. And then also for the purposes of the Chugach Eagle River discussion, just wanted to bring up as well the analysis that I had done several years ago about, you know, eligible parcels within Chugach Eagle River. And if you apply the buffers as noted in code and in the regulations, there's only one parcel within all of Chugach Eagle River that you could place a marijuana facility on, and that's currently APD's firearms training facility out in Birchwood. So it's a little ironic, I think. But that's all I have.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Forrest?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking through this list, and I don't know how specific we want to get, but there are two on here that sort of stick out to me. One is a housing facility owned by a public housing authority. And I do kind of wonder what differentiates, why would a housing facility owned by a public housing authority be different than any housing facility, than any privately owned, for example, apartment complex? I think it sort of speaks to a certain kind of stereotype about who lives in public housing authorities and whether we should, for some reason, prevent them from having the option of having one of these stores near them. So I think that one to me feels out of place and sort of patronizing, frankly. The other one is the habilitative care facilities, and I'm not totally sure what that means even. So I guess, is that a drug treatment facility or is that something else? Could Ryan, could you describe me what that means?
Sure. So through the chair, I'm Ryan Yale with the Planning Department. Going to the housing facility owned by a public housing authority, I believe, I'd have to look back on the records, but I believe that was added because that is a defined, protected land use may not be the correct terminology, but in the Controlled Substances Act, the Federal Controlled Substances Act, that's identified as like a sensitive use. And I think that's why it was thrown in early on in the process. And so that may explain why it's there. The habilitative care facility, that would be like a drug rehab facility, would fall under that. So it's a residential facility where people are living to rehabilitate from either drug addiction or traumatic injury.
So that's what I was thinking. Like the former makes a lot of sense to me. You know, drug and alcohol addiction. But yeah, I think there are some care facilities where you're doing like physical therapy, right? I mean, you were badly hurt in a car accident, for example, and I don't. That to me seems a little bit unnecessary that we would create that. But I'll say also on the earlier one about the federal law and the sensitive use, The state law doesn't have that. So clearly the federal government isn't imposing that on the state or other places around the state.
All right, thanks. Ryan, on that habilitative care, we approved pretty extensive operation off of 48th that was near the Salvation Army Recovery Center that is not currently in operation. Was it just, I mean, would that, if it were operating, have been a barrier? Or
Yeah, so through the chair, Ryan Yelta, Planning Department, that one, it actually met the separation distance. It was pretty darn close, but I think it was 530-ish feet away as measured via shortest practical pedestrian route. So we didn't need to pursue a variance for that case.
Okay. Okay, so to the committee, how would you like to proceed here? We have a list of uses here, and I think there were comments like video arcades. I think Ryan had told us was tricky to enforce. Then the points Forrest made, on habilitative care, maybe specify more cleanly if there's wording in Title 21, so it would be to recovery centers and not every habilitative care. I think there was also comments Harry McDonald Center is included here, but it would also be included under neighborhood rec center, so we probably don't need it called out specifically. Child care centers. I mean, do we want to X some out and ask Dean to prepare those changes? And I mean, essentially put out to public hearing and see what people say. Are we brave?
This is Meg. I mean, I think, yeah, to the extent that some just don't make sense or covered under other categories.
I see, no one in the queue to address that. Meg?
Yeah, so I think to the extent that we can simplify it and streamline it, it makes absolute sense. And then this is the difficulty, of course, in code changes. We don't solicit public comment in the way the state does, where what would you change if you could change type discussion. We simply propose changes and then get feedback if it's too far or not enough. Because I think what I've heard today is that some of the reasons, in being super conservative to start don't necessarily apply in the same way. And I think it's important that we bring this up. If we're bringing it up to date, let's bring it up to date for the current reasons why we want these to be separated. So I would, definitely like to see it streamlined and see what the public says. And if the why still exists for the current version, then great, we can address that. If it's no, we totally get it, this is how it's working and it's working fine, it would work this way too, then great, we can make those updates.
Do you want to go down this list? And for anybody who's here, in the chat, it is posted, and then people on the phone, you should be able to get it. You go to the committee website. So boarding school, I think, I guess any of these schools, Ryan, we have something where you can't be within a drug-free school zone, and school grounds are protected in the state. Is a boarding school would typically be private. Would that be covered?
Through the chair, Ryan, it would be covered. Yeah. So the reason that we differentiate between boarding school, elementary, middle school, high school is just due to the organization of Title 21. Those are the specific use types for educational facilities. So if we were to just say school ground, it would leave some ambiguity there. So we just specify boarding school, elementary, or high school, and that includes private and public.
Okay, so basically what we have of those first three encapsulate school ground in the state. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so those we would not change. Okay, playground. Thoughts on that?
I think we need to keep playground. We could include it in recreation areas, recreation centers. We could include it within a broader category. Some playgrounds obviously are on school grounds, so those are covered. But we have, I know in Chugach Eagle River, we have several just little neighborhood parks that are playgrounds, and we certainly have then larger parks that have playgrounds. So I think we probably need to keep that one in some way, shape, or form.
So Ryan, has implementation of that been tricky? I know we don't, like, if there's a playground in a big park, it's not to the lot line of the park, it's to the boundaries of the playground. Is the current description adequate?
So through the chair, that understanding is correct. Yeah. So the separation distance would go to the edge of the playground, not to the edge of the park. And now I recall that earlier I had mischaracterized what I was stating about the facility in Minnesota, and it wasn't crosswalk gate, it was hopscotch gate. And we had a singular hopscotch that was within a paved plaza, and whether or not that constituted a playground or not. So that was the impetus for us to come up with a definition for playground, which is in the back of Title 21. So it's in all of our definitions, and it only applies to separation distance measurements for marijuana facilities. So essentially, you would measure your short practical pedestrian route to the edge of the playground, and the edge of the playground is defined as, the edge of the safe fall. So that would be like your mulched areas, and also, how many pieces of equipment are on the playground to where it actually becomes a playground and not just a singular piece of recreation equipment. So it's tricky and a bit complicated, but we do have a guidance on that.
Okay, so you find what's in there now adequate?
Through the chair, I do.
Okay. Okay, any other thoughts on that? Forrest, Meg, Pete?
Is there a corollary? I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but is
Go
there
ahead.
a corollary for playground for package stores for alcohol, or is it simply just for marijuana?
Through the chair, I don't believe that there's a separation distance requirement for alcohol licenses and playgrounds. I believe childcare facilities, yes, but I do not believe they call out playgrounds specifically.
Can I ask a quick follow-up, please?
Sure.
So can you give me a little bit of historical education other than hopscotch gate of why we've included playground, or was that really the precipitating factor?
So the addition of playgrounds as a protected land use came before hopscotch gate. And I believe, just speaking broadly, I think it was added in just to be conservative and to sort of cover all the bases for what could result in potential conflicts or negative influences on children. So I don't know if I have a very specific answer for that. I think it's just speaking more broadly and having a more conservative approach.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ed Ryan. Okay, Pete, thoughts on it?
I just stepped back into this meeting about 2 minutes ago. So are you talking about public housing authority, that situation?
Not yet. We're dropping down through the list of protected land uses to see should we modify them. So it looks we haven't gone too far, but we're making headway. Schools, the first three relate to schools, and those need to be in there to match what the state does. So we're contemplating playground, and had some. Ryan says what we're doing now seems to work. Crystal would like to keep it, but we're just looking at things. Should we modify or delete them from the list when we go forward with these proposed changes?
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, I hear no consensus on scratch and playground, so let's leave that. A housing facility owned by a public housing authority. We talked about, Forrest brought that up. Any thoughts on that? It's not in the state, so we're not required? Is it necessary?
I think that's going to be a Dean question.
Okay.
Well, in my opinion, I kind of thought this was a stretch from the very beginning. Just because someone's living where in some sort of public housing, I don't know.
Well, Pete, you
Well,
were there
didn't
when
we
that
say
was
something?
made. When this
Right,
list
yeah,
was made, do you recall?
We went around on that for a while, and it originally it had something to do with federal housing, and then it just got changed to public housing, and that was what, 6 years ago or something like that, 5.5 years ago when this was put together. And I haven't heard that there's been problems in any of the public housing authorities. So I don't know. I wouldn't have a problem deleting this one.
Our challenge here is there may not have been problems because there aren't any near them, or is it because there would never be a problem? Crystal?
Thanks. I thought the question was whether or not the federal government in funding those things actually required some kind of distancing from any access to marijuana and maybe even alcohol. I don't know. But wasn't that the question? And that's why Meg was saying we should ask Dean about that to see if it's actually a requirement of the housing facility, not so much the sale of marijuana, but it had to do with some federal requirements for the facility itself. Anyway, that's what I gleaned out of the reason why we're asking Dean this question. Thanks.
We will, but if he says, sure, you can do it because the state allows it, then we might have a direction. So, because it's not on the state's list. Okay, so we'll check with Dean on that. Exactly. And then consider maybe scratching that in the draft AO. So child care center, any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I'm having trouble using the queue with this new update to Teams. Unfortunately, there it goes. So this one's not highlighted in green, which indicates it would be part of the state's list, but I don't see it on the state's list. So is it required by the state or not?
So through the chair, this is Ryan with the planning department. The definition of youth center can be a little more fluid. So child care center would fall under the youth center definition in state code. Okay,
then it doesn't. It's not worth us talking about then.
Okay, I'll skip that. Okay, homeless and transient shelters.
Again, can I speak, Mr. Welton? I'm sorry.
Sure, go ahead. No, it's fine.
It's one of these funny things. I think I would favor removing it because I just don't think it actually. Well, it kind of gets to your point about the security cameras and those kind of things. I think these are a net benefit to a lot of the communities that they go into. And I also think, again, goes into the stereotyping about what we think about people that are experiencing homelessness. On the other hand, I could see how this would be perceived in the public, and that we would get a lot of perhaps angry testimony about this if we removed it. So I don't know. I'm conflicted about it. I don't think I would have supported putting it in there in the first place, but I think is going to be painful to remove it, unfortunately.
Okay. Thanks. Let me, Meg, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it should be removed for a couple of reasons. One is some of the shelter that is provided is low barrier shelter. It recognizes that people may use substances, including marijuana, and that they shouldn't be denied shelter. And I completely agree. We also get concerns about extensive foot traffic. So this would just possibly exacerbate that if you were an individual experiencing homelessness and you had to walk a large space, a large distance. Shelters also have the option of being high barrier, which would prohibit someone who possibly used a substance from coming into their facility. I don't see a rationale for creating a separation distance. And I think the issues raised by Mr. Dunbar in particular around security and lighting are actually an overall boon for the neighborhood and mitigate some of the factors. I realize that it will be controversial because of perceptions people hold around individuals experiencing homelessness. But as we also look to potentially expand where homeless and transient shelters could be located, this could have maybe an unintended consequence. So I don't see that we're getting complaints specifically related to shelter and use of marijuana. So it seems like it was maybe a protective measure put in when it was a bit more unknown, but it doesn't really seem justified to me at this point.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Jamie?
Thank you, John. Yeah, I'm not for taking this out. We're here to protect the homeless, and we know that they have high drug use within the homeless community. We've been discussing this since I've been on the assembly nonstop about rehabs for the homeless, and to invite this in this area is just, I agree with Mr. Dunbar. We're going to get extreme pushback from the public, and I don't believe the public would be supporting this. We're actually going to be opening Pandora's box. So I would definitely say that this does not need to be stricken, and it should stay as a protected land use. Thank you, John.
All right, thanks. Crystal?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't want to see this removed either. I think certainly there are homeless that do not have substance abuse issues. However, I do know that with the violence and the assaults, the things that are happening at the Sullivan right now, the recent incidents, there was a rape there last weekend, I believe, not this current weekend, but the weekend before. Anyway, they know that there's a lot of drugs still coming into that facility, and so they're having to deal with all of the implications of that on a regular basis. So I think the one thing we don't want to do is make it easier for those drugs to come into a facility like that or any facility like that. So while we're combating this whole issue with drug and alcohol misuse, then we ought to be making sure that we're making it a little bit easier on those who are trying to run a shelter as safely and securely as possible, rather than making it more complicated or easier for somebody to bring those kinds of substances into that community. So I think we need to be actually extra cautious anymore, not less cautious about that. So I'm going to oppose taking it out. If we want to define what a shelter is, whether it be, a transient shelter or even a rehabilitative type of sheltering. I think we can probably, we would be better off, better served, maybe identifying those and defining them a little bit better. But I don't think we would need to take them out as being a protected use from marijuana establishments. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Crystal. I just want to, so better define them. So would there be some type of shelter that, you think it might not be an issue?
Well, I think you can probably, when we have these mass congregate shelters, I think we have to be more careful with those than we would say a home where 2 or 3 people are living in. So that was kind of my thought about that, is if we want to define the larger shelters and separate that out, maybe that would be one way of doing something that, I don't know, I think we could probably work on that if that was the desire of the committee or even of the public, because I recognize that a homeless shelter can mean a lot of different things. So if we want to be more specific about, especially like I said, with the mass shelters, those seem to be the most problematic. They have the highest security needs, and they have the probably one of the highest assault and need for other security and police intervention. So anyway, if we wanted to identify those, we could do that. So just make that distinction.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I see Michelle Mcnulty's here now too. Good. Let me go through. I got Forrest, Meg, and then Michelle can give us feedback. Forrest?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I appreciate what Ms. Kennedy just said. And I think that when I was thinking about this and listening to what Ms. Zolotel was saying as well, I was thinking about the potential non-congregate facility that we were looking to purchase in Spenard. Now, I don't think of that as a shelter. It was a non-congregate housing facility for transitional housing. But I am curious, had we done that, would it have fallen into this under this prohibition in the opinion of the planning department? So maybe Ryan could speak to that.
Okay, let me go to Meg, and then we'll get Michelle's asked to be in the queue. She could address it, or Ryan. Does that work?
Yeah. Well, my point is just if it did, or I guess even if it didn't, I could see adding additional language like the word congregate. Like you put congregate in front of this, congregate homeless and transient shelters. That might get to what some of the point that Ms. Kennedy just made. So I could see further clarifying language being added. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Meg?
Thanks. Yeah, along what Mr. Dunbar was saying, I think we need to be really clear about what we're talking about, because right now, we have a variety of ways to shelter individuals. There's the mass shelter, but I think that's kind of, the Sullivan Arena. That's an outlier. That is COVID related and kind of needs to be set aside, I think, as an outlier during the time of COVID. We have used a lot of non-congregate shelter as well right now. And so, would those fall in the definition because they are temporarily designated as shelter? And it really invites us right back into the Hope Center. Was the Hope Center a homeless and transient shelter? Because it is it's still considered to be on an emergency temporary basis. Because of the current zoning restrictions, it's not on PLI. So I think there are some issues with how it would be applied. So I just wanted to raise those before Michelle speaks, to just give a few more options for her to possibly weigh in on.
Okay, good. Thanks. Michelle. Oh, and I should, just for the record, Michelle Mcnulty, Planning Director. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, and I'm going to try to make sure I capture all the different questions. I may need Assemblyman Forrest Dunbar to repeat his question, but to Meg's question and point about the temporary facilities, no, those are not considered under the temporary or under the protected use, which is why the Hope Center, why that needed the variance, why that whole conversation kind of ensued, because they did not automatically, it wasn't clear cut that they would be considered a homeless and transient shelter. I think I need a definition. Sorry for not really knowing what you mean when you say congregate, but from a homeless and transient, we have a lot of different definitions in code that address different living situations. And the larger ones like Brother Francis and the Rescue Mission on Tudor, those fall under the traditional homeless and transient center, providing, you know, a host of social services as well as overnight shelter. And that's what I think it's more under that mass care. But we also have things like assisted living facilities that are on a smaller basis, and habilitative care. When we talk about habilitative care and look at it from a global, that's also, we have smaller facilities that I think gets to the question about some of the smaller groups of people who are, you know, living in a facility, but certain services are being provided to help either with their addiction to drug and alcohol or other, you know, infirmities that they need assistance with. So I don't know if that helps, but I think with the homeless and transient shelters, as it's defined and how we have different living conditions or situations defined in Title 21, that we really are just capturing the larger models. Although habilitative care, if that stays in, would also cover, would also be restrictive to those smaller group home settings.
So, Michelle, I think in Forest Points, we had a proposal for the city to buy a hotel on Spinard Road that would be, you know, for people who, you know, with a little more stability in a private space would be able to kind of get their lives together and move on from homelessness. So it would essentially be a place for homeless people who are moving up and out. Where would that land in our definitions?
Not knowing specifically, if there was going to be individual, like a charge, you know, even if it were $1 per day, that might fall under a rooming house. If there's a certain commitment to living there for a certain period of time, it might also fall under a rooming house and not a homeless and transient shelter. So I don't know enough about the specifics of that program to give you a direct answer, but I can give you those caveats that there's some things that would have placed that in a rooming house. And therefore would not be included in the separations.
It would be good to make that clear somewhere, because we may run into that where, you know, if they're not included, people may view it as a homeless shelter and get upset if there's a marijuana shop across the street, you know, or someone, you know. I think that's a distinction that's lost on many of us.
I think what might be helpful for this group, why don't we pull kind of a table together of the various housing models that we have that would cover, you know, habilitative care versus assisted living versus a homeless and transient shelter versus rooming house. And that may give you a better idea of how we define things.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. We'll have this conversation at more than this meeting for sure. So, okay, good. Okay, so we have a little bit of work to do on that for definitions, and then possibly fine tune the definition on what homeless and transient shelter would be, and maybe or maybe not take it out. Do you want to move on to any more thoughts on this? And actually, I should say, Ms. Weltzing, you put some things in the chat. Do you want to comment briefly on this?
Oh, no, just, you know, what I said in the chat, that a little bit of, you know, definition on this religious assembly, since there is the discussion with the planning department has made on the ancillary uses versus the primary. And then, you know, I would just echo some of the assembly members on looking at whether or not homeless and transient shelters should stay in. And I would think that the Hope Center probably has some good thoughts on this, because they're not technically a homeless shelter under the code, but they do provide that function, and they have a marijuana facility right next to them, so they might have some good input. And I don't know which way they would, you know, say, but it would be somebody with actual real life experience in the situation. That's all.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, we can invite them when we discuss this further. Okay, dedicated parks in Chugach, Eagle River. What, Crystal and Jamie, what are your thoughts on changes to Eagle River?
Well,
This
you know,
is
we had a
Jamie.
bit
Thank
of
you.
that. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you. Crystal's probably going down the same road I am. We actually had discussions with all the community council. We have been the district that has overwhelmingly voted no each time that this has come up, as far as making alcohol legal, our tax in our district, and marijuana use also. So far we've had overwhelmingly no pot shops here in Eagle River, Chugach. So I believe you'll still get that type of pushback. I don't think it's going to get good support here in our community. In fact, I know it won't. And I think we need to respect the majority of the people in Chugach, Eagle River, and make sure that we do right by them and what they want and what they've requested. Crystal, go ahead.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead,
Thanks,
Crystal.
thanks, John. You know, one of the things that I keep hearing over and over in our community is, you know, we are such a tight, condensed community, if you will. We really are a small town. And so the way we are built, if anybody's been down Main Street, Eagle River, if you will, we are schools, preschools, churches, a couple of parks, and you know, and really, and yes, there are liquor stores. We certainly have cars. We have a Brown Jug, you know, but for the most part, we're such a small town and so compacted, if you will, that anything that's related to marijuana, you know, does cause people to pause and say, you know, we just don't want it here. And, you know, and even the people that I'm hearing from who regularly buy marijuana tell me that, yeah, you know what, I'm happy to go to the Valley. It's not a big deal. And some of them obviously would go into Anchorage. But you have to realize that there are a lot of the people out here that are actually much closer to Wasilla or Palmer than they are to anything in Anchorage. So so anyway, it's just something that we broached the subject on about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago, when we had a group from Fairbanks that wanted to come in and build a retail store in downtown Eagle River. And so they had a lot of conversations with our Chamber of Commerce, with a lot of the different businesses, certainly with the community councils. And everybody was just, you know, trying to be really nice and friendly, and they did a good job of that. But they just said, you know, we're just really not interested. And I think that's really the sentiment, is just not interested. And it was kind of funny because somebody said, well, some people have said, well, you know, you'll benefit by the tax basis. And I think what a lot of people didn't realize is that we don't get to keep our taxes out here. You know, it all goes to the municipality as a whole. So so there really wasn't a good argument there either. But we do see other arguments in terms of trying to figure out how we would increase some of the security and you know, having the police coverage in that, which we always kind of fight for out here as it is anyway. So again, you know, there was just no real benefit to doing that and allowing it, and people liked just the idea of protecting the small town cohesiveness that we have out here that's so family oriented. So we just didn't want to see that disrupted. So that's about it in terms of the sentiment. So I think,
Okay.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and it's helpful to know that you had a recent experience kind of bringing this up, you know, with that proposal last year. We're getting close to the end here. We got about 10 more minutes, and I would like to open it up for the public who are available. Meg, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate Eagle River Chugach's perspective. The one piece of information I would want to know and hear from APD is, have they had driving under the influence related to marijuana? You know, who knows if they know but due to having to travel to obtain and just poor choices of not waiting to consume the product until home or in a safe space. So I would just want to reach out to APD and check to see if they have that information.
Okay. All right. Good. We can do that. Thanks. Forrest?
Thanks. I just have a legal question, and this is not based on any indication that they would be interested in this, but, you know, former Assemblymember Starr fought to get an overlay district in the Eklutna Village that makes it so that a lot of sort of general planning and zoning rules don't apply there. I'm curious, does this Chugach Eagle River district, as defined here, does that subsume the overlay district, or could Eklutna do their own thing if they chose?
Do you
Guess
want
that's
me
to Crystal.
Okay,
Yeah, I guess
thoughts on that?
none of us
or
were.
did Ryan?
Yeah.
And
Or
Ryan might be
Michelle.
a better one to answer specifically, because they absolutely do have their own overlay, and I know there are a lot of specifics in terms of what kind of road upgrades and things like that can be done out there. But anyway, and just in terms of what would be allowed for different establishments, I'm not that familiar with it, so maybe Ryan is. So thanks.
Ryan or Michelle?
Yeah, through the chair, this is Ryan Yell. I can take a stab at that. So I will be honest too, I haven't reviewed an enormous amount of projects out in Eklutna, but generally speaking, you know, overlay districts can be more restrictive than what's in code, but they can't be more lenient. So I would have to do a little bit more analysis on that to exactly see how the marijuana regs would fall into that category.
That's interesting, because I'd understand it to be the opposite. Like, you know, that downtown, for example, there are no parking requirements, but perhaps that's not an overlay district in the same way. Anyway, I have no indication that they are at all interested in that. I was just curious. So don't anyone think that Eklutna is interested. I haven't heard that, but I was just curious how the laws paired up with each other. No need to investigate it further until they actually come and ask us.
All right. Thanks.
Through the chair, this is Michelle Mcnulty. If I can just add, I actually worked with Eklutna on writing that overlay district. And so it was prior to marijuana being legal. And essentially what that overlay district did was actually remove the requirement for a lot of Title 21 requirements for, you know, residential design, landscaping, recognizing that they were kind of a village in a city. But as far as use specific, I actually believe it would, if they ever wanted to bring on a marijuana facility, they would have to update that overlay district, because marijuana wasn't an allowed use at the time and it wasn't covered in the list of allowed uses.
Thank you. And again, they have not indicated they want to do this. I don't want any rumors getting started.
Noted.
All right. Words out. Okay, Pete?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to mention that when you don't have, you know, legal retail shops in your area, then you're encouraging the black market to continue. And one of the reasons for legalization was to try to eliminate the black market. And so when we have one part of town that doesn't have any retail, it's actually encouraging the black market to continue. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So we just wrapping up here are through, I guess, the two Eagle River pieces here. And I would like to go to audience participation. I've got not a lot of extending would be a little difficult for me. Is that okay with people? And we'll continue this at our next meeting. Crystal, are you typing in? And Jamie?
Yes, I was.
Go ahead, Jamie. I see you're in there.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond. I think it was Mr. Peterson who spoke about the black market. I actually spoke to the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and they said that the black market in Eagle River actually isn't a lot unless you're thinking about how high schoolers have access. So they said actually that it's not overwhelming here in Eagle River remotely, and that the only people that are doing it are children who are underage. And so if we're looking at the black market, they shouldn't be having it anyways. So out here in Eagle River, according to my source at the Department of and drug enforcement, the black market's not a big deal out here in Eagle River. People drive either the 21 miles into, it might even be closer now, into Anchorage, or like Miss Kennedy had said, they go into the valley. Thank you,
Okay.
John.
All right, thanks. So last few minutes here, call for public comments. Mr. Haberman, you're there?
Yeah. Yep.
Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, my name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself. First, I'd like to compliment the leadership at the beginning of the meeting, Senator Wellington, and directing the committee and cooperating to have, when people speak, to identify themselves and who they represent, because have not that information, including later on, if anyone reviews the records, it's difficult to find out who is saying what. And so that's very important, and thank you very much. Second is, I'd like to compliment, again, I've said this before, what a different world it is to listen to you all get involved or address the issues dealing with like marijuana, versus out in the Borough Assembly, they don't even discuss it at a Borough Assembly meeting. It's at a Planning Commission meeting, and they make decisions there. But I'm very glad to see that you continue to want to be involved and connect with the people, and before you make those decisions. And thank you very much. Second is you've got a work session tomorrow. When I say you, the Assembly as a whole, I am concerned that these work sessions, particularly a subject that you're going to deal with tomorrow, you don't connect with the people, and you select who you invite to be part of that work session, and those issues that you direct in the work session wind up, in particular ones tomorrow, are winding up to be at the Assembly meetings, and a lot of that discussion also happens in the beginning of the meeting, where there's limited opportunity for the public to be engaged. So that's all I have to say, and I wish you all the best, and thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Haberman. So, Ms. Donaldson, if you're there, I think if you hit *6, you're welcome to talk to us. Okay, nothing there. Anyone else from the public like to speak? I hear silence. Crystal?
Thank you. Yeah, just two comments. I did want to echo a bit of what Ms. Allard said. APD has told me too that the black market, for a lot of the reasons that she explained, is actually widespread throughout the municipality, and it has to do with people who are just growing their own marijuana and selling it on the side, and then those who weren't actually allowed to buy it legally. So it exists throughout the municipality. And the other thing is, that's one reason why I really wanted the conversation in regard to the state revisions to go on until next meeting as well, because we can have someone from APD there. Like I said, I've already talked to one of the DUI investigators who will have a lot of that kind of detailed information for us. So we will we could use him as well during a conversation about some of these kinds of issues. So I will make them aware that we may have a bigger, broader conversation, and we could use some of their expertise next meeting. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And I think our next meeting, the agenda will look a lot like this one. Then we'll look at this THC change, but with APD here and hopefully the health department, and then we'll keep plugging away at this changes in marijuana law. So, okay, without any opposition, we adjourned.
Move to adjourn.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks.